Pompeii didn't die by surprise. It had 18 hours. From the moment the mountain blew to the moment the city went dark, nearly a full day passed, more than enough time to pack a bag and leave. And still, thousands of people stayed. We've been told Pompeii was swallowed in the blink of an eye, but the truth is different. That first morning, when the sky began spitting stones, everyone could see that something was wrong with the mountain. Some climbed aboard a boat that same day and left. Others barred their doors and hid inside their homes. For their property, out of "surely it won't come to that," or simply out of fear. We're going to follow those 18 hours in which the two paths split apart, starting at dawn. And as we go, ask yourself one thing: which side would you have been on? That morning, the alleys of Pompeii bustled like any other day. The city was in a slightly festive mood over a stretch of religious holidays. People were already gathering in the forum, and children ran through the narrow lanes. In a bakery, a man stands in front of his oven. He scored a round of dough into 8 wedge-shaped cuts and pushed it into the blazing interior. He waits for the loaf to brown, probably running the afternoon sales through his head. But that man will never take the bread out. And this isn't an invented scene. That loaf was actually found, carbonized, sealed inside the oven, its 8 wedges intact exactly as he'd left them. If you raised your eyes to the walls, the whole city was covered in graffiti. Campaign posters begging for a vote, love confessions, announcements for the upcoming gladiator matches. More than 10,000 inscriptions have been counted, roughly as if every resident had left a line of their own. On one wall, somebody had scrawled something that makes you think, "I'm amazed, wall, that you haven't collapsed under the weight of so much nonsense scribbled on you." A social network from 2,000 years ago, carved in stone. So this was about as ordinary a day as they come, nothing special about it. But this peaceful city was, in fact, sitting in an extraordinarily dangerous spot. Just a few years earlier, a major earthquake had knocked it flat, and people were still rebuilding the cracked temples and broken houses. The memory of feeling the ground heave under their feet was anything but distant. And not far from the city rose a mountain with gentle slopes. Vineyards terraced down its flanks. From the grapes on that hill, people made wine. Nobody thought of it as dangerous. It was simply the peaceful hill that watched over the town from behind. What that mountain truly was, not one person in the city knew. And that day it was drawing breath, slowly, in silence. It happened around midday. The ground let out one great roar, and all at once the summit of that vineyard hill tore clean off. A dark column erupted toward the sky, a tangled mix of gas, pulverized rock, and ash. To give you a sense of how high it climbed, it reached up to 3 times the altitude a passenger jet cruises at above the clouds. It wasn't like a single firecracker going off, but more like a cannon big enough to bury a city, fired straight up. And then something strange happened. In broad daylight, the city began to darken. As the column rose, its top spread out sideways like a giant pine tree and blanketed the sky. The sun was erased. Midday, Pompeii turned as black as midnight. People lit lamps in the middle of the day and groped with their hands to make out one another's faces. But here's something worth understanding. What was raining down on their heads at this point wasn't fireballs. It was light pumice, that same rock powder that had gone up, cooled, and was falling back down. Stone so riddled with holes it would float on water. It was warm, sure, but getting hit by it didn't kill you on the spot. What does that mean? That there was still time to escape. Running beneath that stone-raining sky was terrifying, no question, but anyone who moved at that moment could still live. In fact, some people gathered their things that very afternoon and boarded boats, leaving the harbor behind, rowing with their backs to that black sky. Across the bay, someone was watching the whole thing. It was Pliny the Elder, admiral of the Roman fleet, and a scholar bent on recording everything that existed in the world. Beside him sat his 17-year-old nephew, the one who would later be the only person to set that day down in writing. That we know Pompeii's last day in this kind of detail we owe entirely to the 2 letters that boy left behind. The moment he saw the black column, the uncle ordered the ships launched, not to go and gawk, but to rescue the people trapped on the far shore. When his terrified men begged him to turn back, he is said to have answered, "Fortune favors the brave," and steered the ship straight toward the volcano. The man who spoke that line would never rise again from that beach the next day. Since some people left by boat, it's easy to assume all of Pompeii escaped that way. But that isn't what happened. Those who left were a handful, and far, far more stayed behind in the city, even though the sky they could have fled through was still open. Why on earth? The first reason you can't take the step even when you could flee is that you can't bear to leave everything behind. Think about it. The land, the house, the shop, a lifetime of savings gathered coin by coin. All of it is inside those 4 walls. The instant you lock the door and leave the city, everything you built with your own sweat is buried whole beneath that mountain of stone. So they packed, unpacked to grab one more thing too precious to leave, packed again. Once it settles down a little, I'll come back and get the rest. And while they wavered like that, time slipped away from them. And in exactly that window, the sky sealed them in. The pumice fell without pause, and the light stone and ash began to pile up in the streets, first the ankle, then the knee. As the night deepened, in front of the doors it heaped up to nearly twice an adult's height. Now you could shove the door and it wouldn't budge. A whole slope of stone was leaning against it from outside. From the roof overhead came sounds that promised nothing good, the endlessly falling stones drumming on the tiles, the rafters groaning under the load. In one house, the ceiling came down whole, onto the people inside. If it was that dangerous indoors, then you just step outside, right? The instant you open the door and set a foot in the street, hot stones come down on your head like hail. Palm-sized rocks falling from the black sky all night long, and you'd have to run through it all the way to the edge of the city. That's not something an umbrella stops. And here people fall into a curious calculation. If stones are pouring down like that outside, isn't it better to stay under the roof? At least there's a wall and maybe it'll let up soon. So many believed the house was safer and hid, instead, even deeper inside. Which door would you open? Outside is a hell of raining stone. Inside is a tomb that could cave in at any moment. Neither foot lifts easily toward either side. Would you throw yourself into that rain of stone or hold out a little longer under the roof? That night, there were also those who made the opposite choice. In a garden on the city's south side, 13 people moved huddled together as a single cluster. Men, women, children, and the old, all mixed in, they walked toward the city gate, enduring feet that sank into a blanket of stone already past their waists. The gate leading out of the city was right in front of them. Whether it was the one crouched behind a wall or the one treading the stones toward the exit, that night no one could have known who was right. But it wasn't only property that pinned people in place. There was a deeper reason. Those particular days happened to be a festival season honoring the gods. In front of the city's temples, the prepared offerings still sat, and people, hearing the mountain growl, knelt before them. The gods will protect us. Why pray with catastrophe right on top of you, you're thinking. Well, to them, that mountain was where the gods lived. Stones falling from the sky wasn't the work of a volcano, but the will of the gods. And if that was so, then pleading was more right than packing a bag and running. On top of this sat one more feeling. Surely it won't come to this. This city had shaken a few years back, and before that too. Each time, cups fell off the shelves and the walls cracked, but in the end it all passed. That memory was etched into their bodies. However hard it shakes, in a few days everything goes back to normal. So this time would be the same, they told themselves. Hold out a bit and morning will come. It's the same thing we feel today when the fire alarm that always cries wolf goes off one day, for real. We hear that shrill blare and don't get up out of our seats. Sure, it's another glitch. The people of Pompeii were exactly that. When faith in the gods, and surely not, overlapped, their feet stuck to the floor. And in the middle of all this, night fell. The ash that had filled the sky by day now covered the entire city. Even if you raised a torch, you couldn't see more than a few steps ahead. Now, even if you wanted to leave, another problem appeared. It was impossible to get your bearings, to tell which way lay the city gate and which the road down to the sea. For those who told themselves, let's just wait until morning, the time they'd had to flee was dissolving into the dark. At the entrance of a house they call the House of Orpheus, a dog was found much later. It was in 1874. Its bronze collar was still fastened. Its owner probably didn't abandon it. Maybe they meant to be back in a moment, or maybe they were swept out among the crowd without even time to unclip the leash. Chained, as the ash rose up its legs, it stiffened with its back arched. That gesture has crossed the centuries and arrived intact to this day. That dog's owner never came back to the door. The people who stayed still didn't know it. This was the last night. And at dawn, the fate of everyone still there is decided all at once. The colossal column of ash that had propped up the sky all night loses its strength as day breaks. What had only shot upward can no longer hold its own weight, and it collapses. What had been fired into the sky now pours down the mountainside as one mass. This is the pyroclastic flow. Ash, scorching gas, and pulverized rock tangled into a single body, sliding down the mountain. It was moving at over 60 miles an hour, a mass of heat faster than a car on the freeway, hugging the ground, surging toward the town. There was no escaping that speed on foot, at a run, or on horseback. That mass hits Herculaneum first, the neighbor closer to the mountain. The heat that swallowed it was fierce enough to split human skulls and turn the tissue inside them to glass. and a short while later it reaches Pompeii, a little farther off. By the time it arrives at the city, the heat had eased somewhat, but even so, a temperature hotter than a home oven cranked to its maximum swept through the city in an instant. At that point, hiding in the deepest room of the house was of no use whatsoever. Having barred the door, having pulled a blanket over your head, none of it meant a thing. It was over before there was time to draw a single breath. For a long time, people misread those curled-up postures. Seeing the bodies with hands outstretched and torsos pulled in on themselves, it was thought for years that these were signs of a long agony, the marks of writhing in pain. But what the most recent research has revealed is different. It was the result of the sudden heat, which contracted every muscle in the body all at once. There was no room to feel a drawn-out pain. The body simply stopped in the very posture it had been in a moment before. The baker standing in front of his oven, standing, the chained dog, its back arched, the person turning toward the door turned toward the door. A whole city was frozen in that instant, as if someone had pressed pause. It wasn't erasure, it was a stop. Time halted at that exact dawn, and yet this city didn't vanish. It wasn't wiped out entirely under the ash. It slept for 1,500 years, holding that dawn's single moment perfectly intact, erased from the maps and from people's memory. Until one day a shovel woke that long sleep. A crew of laborers begins digging into this ground. It was a project to cut a canal and carry water through. Suddenly the shovel scrapes something hard beneath the soil. They clear the dirt away and a painted wall appears, a wall with an old picture on it. But they had not the faintest idea it was Pompeii. A weird old wall turned up, and they covered it back over with soil. The city had surfaced within arm's reach and was buried once more. The city truly woke a good deal later. This time they dug in earnest. The more ash they cleared, the more astonishing things poured out. Frescoes still holding their color, dishes still set on the tables, a whole alley emerging into the light. But the ones doing the digging came across something small and strange. In the hardened layer of volcanic ash, empty spaces had been bored through here and there, like the holes in a wheel of cheese. At first, no one knew what they were, just hollow pockets. One of the men in charge of the dig had an odd idea. What if we pour plaster into those empty spaces? He let runny plaster flow into the hollows, waited for it to set, and then, very carefully, peeled the ash away from around it. What came out was people. Someone hugging their knees, someone covering their face with both hands, someone leaning toward whoever was beside them. They came walking out, so to speak, in their last posture from 2,000 years ago. That was what the empty spaces really were. The flesh had disappeared centuries ago, but the ash had wrapped the body and, hardening, become a mold in the shape of a person. That's where the story we've long known ends. But now comes something that puts a chill in you. Not long ago, scientists pulled genetic material from the bone fragments left inside these plaster casts. And the story we'd believed for 2,000 years comes crashing down. There was a cast of an adult clutching a child to their chest. For the longest time, that figure was called the mother protecting her child. But the genes told a completely different story. That person wasn't even female, and didn't share a single drop of blood with the child in their arms. A stranger. There were also two bodies that hardened leaning on one another. They'd been taken for sisters. And yet there was no kinship between them at all, and at least one of the two was male. Every label we'd pinned on them, standing there in front of them, was pure imagination on our part. And the genes revealed one thing more, that the roots of these people reached far away, to the eastern Mediterranean and North Africa. Pompeii was a city where foreigners who'd flowed in from every corner of the empire lived side by side, mixed together. The ones we assumed were familiar faces had come, in truth, from places far more distant than we'd guessed. So, was the feeling they stirred in us false? No. We may have pinned the label on wrong, but that last moment nobody made up. Not a mother, and still they held the child. Not sisters, and still they leaned toward each other. That people without a single drop of shared blood chose, of everyone, each other to share their final breath with. 2,000 years on, that posture is still there, and it speaks to us. We may not know the name of the relationship, but that warmth was real. And Vesuvius, because that's what the Vineyard Hill was, hasn't fallen asleep yet. The last time it breathed out was only 80 years ago. Today, on its slopes, around 3 million people build their homes and live their lives. They know the mountain will wake again someday. And even so, this morning they brew their coffee and send the kids off to school. Surely not in my lifetime. It'll be fine for a while longer. Words that resemble, astonishingly, the ones etched into that city centuries ago. The man who pushed the round loaf into his oven that morning felt the same thing we feel setting tonight's dinner table. That nothing would happen, that he'd take it out a little later. only that loaf never made it out of the oven. Would you have opened the door, or would you have stayed? Tell me in the comments and subscribe to the channel.